This is Real Talk, the customer insights show with Jenn Vogel, a top-rated live stream and podcast in the market research and insights industry. We stream live on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, and you can listen on all major podcast channels. Join Jenn and her guests for a weekly discussion around topics that will help you understand your customers better. Real Talk is presented to you by VoxPopMe, the leader in video research and ranked number 1 in qualitative research by Grit 2 years running. Here's today's conversation.
Hello, insights professionals, marketers, and everyone who wants to understand their customers better. I'm your host, Jenn Vogel. Asking the wrong questions of consumers can lead us down a very wrong path. People are trying to please other people, anybody in the insights industry. I don't have to tell you that. If you ask the wrong question, do you like this idea? Of course, they're going to say yes. So it's really important to word those questions just the right way. To discuss that topic and how we can do better, I'm joined by Rob Fitzpatrick, author of The Mom Test. Welcome to the show, Rob.
I'm delighted to be here. Hello, everybody, and thank you for having me, Jen.
Yeah, thank you so much. We at VoxPopMe are very big fans of you and your book. I want to say, I don't remember the first person who read it, but it spread around the company. I think maybe 50% of the company read the book. It's been infiltrated. So we're super excited to have you on today.
Cool. Likewise, I'm always, this stuff's so important, and the cost of getting it wrong is so destructive, right? It's like my first company, we must have lost 3-4 years just because we were asking dumb questions. And after a while that gets expensive. So better to avoid the lies if you're able.
Totally. It does get expensive. Let's kind of kick off and hear a little bit about what brought you to writing this book and what is the Mom Test?
So I fell into trying to understand customers. I guess like many people, where that wasn't the job I wanted, right? I was trying to build products. I was trying to build a startup, and we'd started like many do, just tinkering. And then once we raised the fundraising, we had the investors. We started to get a little bit more serious. They're like, you figure out who's paying for this and what they want. That was 2008. We started that business, so almost 15 years ago. And so we did it. I didn't love it, but I said, okay, I'm gonna do this work. And so we went out and we asked customers what they wanted. We showed them prototypes. We walked through wireframes with them. We tried to understand what they were already doing. But we also were always, I was mixed up, I think, where I was always trying to get their opinions. I was always trying to ask them what they might do or would do in the future. I was trying to get them to anticipate their future behavior. And that kind of works when it's an incremental innovation, like people know what they want from a washing detergent or at this point, a cell phone. But if you're trying to build something new category, even sometimes a new feature set or a market where the product hasn't really existed before, all those traditional research, like what do you want? What should we build? It kind of breaks down because people are very, very bad at predicting their future needs and behaviors, especially if there's a complex workflow or it's going to fit into their life or replace something they're already comfortable with. So the idea of the Mom Test is, motherhood is like, it's the unconditional support figure in your life, right? It's the person who's always kind of there for you. You're like, yeah, Mom, I have this crazy idea. And they're like, yeah, it's going to be amazing. It's going to be great. I'm told this is not true in all cultures, but certainly for me growing up, it was. And I found that it felt very similar what I was hearing from customers, where I was pitching them these visionary product ideas and they're saying, yeah, it's amazing. It's so innovative. I can't believe this doesn't already exist. We can't wait to use it. This is going to be so successful. Everyone's going to use this. And then we would build the thing, 6 months, a year, however long it takes to manufacture these things. And they'd say, oh, actually, we don't really need it. I'm like, what? You told me you'd love it. You told me it'd be so innovative. And they're like, oh, it is innovative. We just don't need it. And so I figured out eventually that it's not the customer's job to tell you the truth. It's your job to phrase the questions and also the context of the conversation, right? So they feel comfortable and they're able to get around these biases. And so the metaphor I like to use is if my mom is the most supportive, most biased person, I can structure the questions in a way that even she's not going to lie to me, then it's probably a good question. It in that way passes the Mom Test. So the simple example is, if you're like, hey mom, what do you think of my yoga training at home app or my, awesome iPhone cookbook app? She's like, oh, it's amazing, because you're talking about the product itself. You're gathering opinions about future usage. Whereas if you flip that and you dig into what they're already doing and why, you dig into the non-consumption, You say, hey mom, weird question, but like, have you tried to look for any yoga apps? Have you searched for any cookbook apps? Like, talk me through which ones you looked at. She's like, oh no, I would never. Why would I? Like, I want to be there in person. Or she might say like, oh yeah, I tried a bunch, but they're garbage for this reason and that reason. So you can sort of, by asking about what they're already doing and why they haven't already solved the problem, why this is still an issue for them, why they haven't already fixed it. You can often get into these just facts about their life, and you're like, oh wow, they do not care at all about this thing. Or you go, oh, they really do care. Their non-consumption is actually good news, because it's non-consumption because they keep failing to successfully buy and find the product they're looking for.
Huge fan of this approach. As I mentioned, we're all big fans of this this concept here, but I think it's really, it's really interesting what you say about how people are just bad about predicting their own behaviors. And it's not that they are intentionally lying. Like, they're probably telling you the truth in the moment. They probably really do believe that. They think that that would be interesting, or they would use it. And when it comes down to that decision-making criteria, we've had other guests on the show. I'm thinking about Melina Palmer, who talks about this, how the subconscious goes into decision-making. There are some things that you just do or don't do without any thought. So if you were using your conscious brain, you probably would choose that. But there's so many other factors that go into it. So,
it's so difficult when people are outside of a purchase and a usage decision. Because when you're doing these feedback conversations, people typically are only seeing the benefit and they're not seeing the trade-off. So you go to someone, you go, hey, I've got this awesome product, it's $100 a month, takes you about 2 hours per week to use, but you're going to live 5 years longer. You're going to be happier, healthier. Like, your whole life is going to change. You're going to get abs, like, you're going to be so happy. And they're like, yeah, I want that. Absolutely, man. I would pay $1,000 a month for that. And then you go, all right, it's called the gym. And they go, no, I don't want that. Never mind. Because you're basically pitching the benefits and you're getting them all psyched up. Like, outside of the context, it's like, oh, I need to drive there. I need to get changed. Oh, it's kind of hot. Like, oh, I'm tired at the end of the day. And you can push on that. And they go, oh, no, I would definitely use this gym thing if you build it. And you go, oh, well, like, you could start now at home. It's not as good, and they're like, oh no, I just don't want to do it. Or you watch their behavior for a couple of weeks and it's not there. Obviously that's a silly example, but in many cases you can find creative parallels for lots of different categories of products and find ways to tease out the truth. And it's not about being pushy. One of the big misunderstandings about this approach is treating it as like a sales tactic, which it isn't. In some cases you do get sales, but those are really a byproduct of the learning. What you're trying to do is it's like, what are they already doing and why? In a perfect world, you would be able to do pure like observational research and just like watch them living their lives. But, people don't really want you following them around 24/7. And even if they could, it's like, it's pretty time consuming. And so this is a way, like these stories about what they're already doing and why, it's a way to tease out the lion's share of that learning so that you can then make your own decisions. Sometimes you're still wrong, but it makes your guesses much more likely to be correct. So then you save a lot of time later in the product iterations and the missed launches.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, to that point, like, you talk a lot in the book about like avoiding bad data. We're talking about asking these important questions. How do teams like avoid bad data in this process?
So the types of bad data I think of, this is, when you say what's bad data, people are going to go, oh, it's not statistically significant, or, oh, it has noise in it. I don't care about that stuff. I mean, obviously it matters, but that's not what bankrupted my first company, right? What bankrupted us was what I call compliments, fluff, and hypotheticals. So compliments are the worst. It's like, I love it. It's incredible. It's so innovative. When I hear a compliment, in most cases, when you hear too many compliments, it means that you exposed your ego earlier in the conversation. So this is really easy for entrepreneurs, but anyone who's trying to figure out what's going to work in a product, it has some of this, where the person you're talking to knows you care, right? And you probably do care. Like, it's much more exciting to bring back good news to the team than bad news. Like, it's much more fun to be able to say like, hey, they really, really love it, we're onto a winner, than to say like, we got to restart everything. We're running into a brick wall here. Or, we need to make big changes, or we need to do this and that. So like, that ego is very detectable. And people go like, you're not going to like talk about a product and someone goes, honestly, I would never in a million years use this. This is the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. And even if they did, the problem there is they're still bad at predicting their future behavior. So they might be wrong. Like I would have said that about Instagram, and then I still ended up using it every day for 10 years. Right? Like people are really bad outside of the usage context. And so the fluff is one, like the compliments. Fluff is, this one's also controversial. It's opinions about the product. It's like, oh, you should do this. You should add this integration. You should have this feature. I think of these sort of like fluffy feature requests as if they are a metal detector going off. So when the metal detector goes beep, 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 it means there might be something of value buried underneath. Not necessarily. It could be metal garbage. Could be something there, but you want to investigate it. You don't take the beeping as the signal, right? The beeping is telling you that there's something of value somewhere nearby. And I think of feature requests and ideas, suggestions in much the same way, where it's like the metal detector going off, I go, ooh, like, why do you want that? What would that let you do that you can't do now? And I'm trying to dig underneath that signal to find, what's buried. And in some cases you find something really valuable. In other cases you go, oh no, that's a version 2, version 3, version never sort of request. Another dynamic here is in these conversations, people want to sound smart and they want to sound like they're contributing. They want to sound helpful. And one of the ways they can do that, the easiest way, is for them to give you lots of ideas. It shows that they're engaged. It shows that they're paying attention. But again, it doesn't necessarily correlate to buying or usage behavior. So you've got compliments, you've got kind of like ideas and opinions. And then the third one is hypotheticals. So like I would, I might, I definitely would. And these are in some ways the trickiest because they feel the most like data. And it's so tempting. I've seen so many startup pitches where they go, we surveyed 1,000 customers and 95% said they would definitely use this product. And then lo and behold, the startup launches 3 months later and they get 0% usage, right? Because it's really easy to say, yeah, on a survey. And it's like real hard to learn a new product, to find out where it fits into your life, to build the habit of using it every day and all of that stuff. So that's the bad data I look out for. And to avoid it, it's not like hearing the bad data does anything dangerous, right? What's dangerous is believing it. So it's fine for the bad data to occur during a conversation. It's really hard to run a perfect conversation because even the act of keeping someone on track, talking about the problem or the behavior that you care about, is going to introduce some biases. And so some of these bad data, the compliments, the hypotheticals, the opinions, naturally surface, even if you're doing everything as well as you can. So the trick is just to treat it as noise. And to do this, you got to take good notes or good recordings, and you got to refer to them later. So you don't want to be summarizing the meeting in your head as like an emotion, like that went really well, or they loved it. What you want to be doing is you want to be pulling out specific things they said. It's like they said this cost them this much money, or they spend this much time, or they tried to do it this way, and nothing worked. If you can get those like specific data points and then you pull those out, and that's the value. And then, the other stuff that happened during the conversation isn't so relevant. And that was how I learned. Like I learned by taking good notes and going through them after each meeting with the rest of my team. If you're first starting, it's great to go in with 2 people. You don't want more than 2 people because then it starts to feel like a reverse focus group. It's pretty intimidating. But 1 or 2 people's fine. And you can kind of catch each other when you're going off track and jump in. And, I work through it like that. And I don't worry about statistical significance with this type of learning. And the reason for that is that it's best when it's messiest. Like these types of conversations should be giving you insights about the customer that you did not anticipate. They should be surprising you. You should be hearing stuff you didn't expect or you didn't already know. If you're hearing all of the same things, then you're probably at the point of diminishing returns for this batch of conversations, and you probably want to kick your product or your strategy forward. Maybe talk to a different segment, maybe get a prototype that they can play with in their hands. And so I'm not looking to get like thousands and thousands of data points and be like, I know everything. I'm looking to get enough data quickly enough that I can make the next set of product decisions or strategy decisions with reasonable confidence. And so it's kind of like, if it fits onto a pie chart, you've screwed up because you could have learned that data more efficiently with some quantitative research tool. The point of like this style of conversations is to get into the messy in between qualitative stuff that doesn't condense very well, which is also tricky if your manager really wants the 1-pager with statistical significance and pie charts. And this is one of the reasons, this is one of the biggest places where big companies shoot themselves in the foot, because with this category of products, and why they keep getting lapped by startups when it comes to like disruptive and innovative and revolutionary products, it's because they can't handle like messy data just organizationally. And so if you can build that within your team and get buy-in from the boss, it's a really powerful thing. And it lets you build a category of products that big companies normally can't.
Yeah, that's so true. We hear that a lot where, the companies that are actually doing this well, they have to spin up their own agile innovation teams that can be messy. I love how you said that. Like this stuff should be a little bit messy. It doesn't have to be perfect.
Another challenge organizationally is that it's really hard to outsource this stuff. Like you can outsource a survey because you know it's going to be the same 20 questions asked the same way to the same types of people. But if you think about the metal detector, like what does the outsourced customer research person do when the metal detector goes off? Like that's showing them that there's a surprising signal buried somewhere. And I was sitting in a cafe once or a co-working space or something, and there was an entrepreneur at the table next to me who was running a customer interview. I was just there having my coffee. So obviously I was kind of listening in because I was curious. And he was clearly following an interview script that he'd kind of pre-written. It was like basically an in-person survey. And he goes, okay, question 3. And he asked some question. And the person across from him suddenly got emotional, real emotional. And she goes, that is literally the worst part of my day. And he writes down worst part of day. And he goes, okay, question 4. And I was like, what are you doing? Like, that was like the metal detector screaming at you that there's something of value buried down there. And he just moved on because he was so blinded by the script he'd created. And so it's hard to outsource because you want someone who's able, like, who has enough strategic ownership or insight or understanding of the product and the challenges and the risks that they're able to detect these things and dig into them. And it's also hard to outsource because sometimes it's bad news. Like, it's not like, oh, our box should be blue instead of red, or we should use this tagline instead of that tagline. Sometimes the conclusion is like, we should not expand to Asia, or like, we need to completely rethink this product as a low cost entrant instead of a premium entrant, or like, these could be big fundamental changes. And it's super, super hard for external agents to bring that sort of bad news, these big fundamental changes back into an organization and be listened to. Because normally when it happens, you go, you just did a bad job asking questions. And it's sort of like research theater without actually caring, because it doesn't have the chance. Like, the whole point of it is like, you're seeking the bad news because you want it now, not at launch day, so that you can fix things before you launch, right? Or before you do that big marketing spend or whatever it is. So anyway, there's some organizational challenges, but if you can solve it, you really stand out.
Yeah, totally. And as you say, I mean, tough probably to outsource some of these conversations because you really need somebody who understands like what you're trying to get as the next step.
It can be done, but it requires deep understanding and deep trust.
Totally.
So, and if you can find someone who understands your industry well enough and who you trust well enough to take bad news from them as well as good, then, then you got something really special. I'll just say they're rare, but
okay.
Maybe you have some special knowledge in that space.
Right. Or maybe just a long relationship or something.
Exactly. The more trust, and the more understanding of your industry, the easier it is. I just hate when it's like startups are like, oh yeah, we're raising our Series A, so we're going to take like this chunk of money and just like validate our market. It's like, it doesn't work that way. It's like you're getting a slide deck, right? You're not getting, if you do that, you're not getting real understanding. But if you go into it seriously with a good partner, then potentially there's value there. And it would certainly be nice to save the time.
Yeah, totally. I mean, yes, these things can be time consuming. There are some technologies out there that are helping to make it a bit faster.
It's so much nicer now that we can use video calls. When I wrote the mom test, it was 2013, and probably the only bit of the book that really hasn't aged, other than the goofy title, is I said, like, you can never do your customer research remotely. I said you have to it's worth getting on a plane and going to their office. And the reason for that was just cultural, because at the time you could do business through video calls with people you already knew. But nobody was willing to spend the time to build a new relationship or open up space to have these sort of open-ended conversations through video call. They always had another browser tab open. They were doing something else. They were trying to close out the call to get on with their real work. And now that the culture at large has changed around that, it's so much better to do your customer learning remotely. I absolutely love it. I'd be curious which tools you use. I've used all sorts of recording tools, and they're great. They got these auto transcription things in them. It's so nice for sharing little snippets. You don't have to like write down a 3-word quote and try to replay it for your team. You can just give them the customer's words, and they can see the excitement firsthand. It's really nice. It's such a great time to be doing this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I won't spend too much time plugging our own technology, Vox Pop Me, but that's exactly what we do is, taking short form video and analyzing it and really trying to make that qualitative agile, because as you say, now there is technology out there. People can get on a Zoom. People are willing to record videos on their phone and send them to you. So being able to make sense of that stuff really quickly and, not to the point where you need statistical significance, but you can actually scale it. It's not time limiting. And that's a big difference.
On my team now, we do so much of it. It's like almost every day there's a little clip from a customer onboarding or customer conversation we had, or there's something that came from one of our customers out of our customer community. It's like we're so big on sharing that, these little video clips, as you say. It's just so powerful and it's so motivating to the team, right? Because it's so easy for all of this stuff to start to feel like an abstract grind after a while. It's just like you and a product in an office, and it's like, oh no, actually, we're trying to fit this thing into people's lives and help them. And it's so exciting when you see their eyes light up, or that they really care, or that you're, helping them with a problem that hurts them.
For sure. Yeah, it does make a big difference when you really can hear the feedback after they've used it or experienced it, and hear that excitement. And what you said about the fluff and, the kind of the feature request stuff, we used to just internally, we had a channel in Slack for feature requests, right? And everybody, sales or customer success, would drop stuff in there for product. And I remember very distinctly the day that we changed the name of that channel to be about the problem. Like, what problem are they trying to solve? And now we have more sophisticated ways to even track that stuff. But it was such a profound change to say, what are they trying to achieve? Not what feature do they want, but maybe there's a better way for us to solve that problem. And it's our job to come up with that. It's not their job to develop our product. It's our job to make a recommendation based on what we know they're trying to do.
Exactly. I like a doctor-patient metaphor for this, where it's like, it's the patient walks into a doctor's office. The doctor, it shouldn't be like, I know what your problem is. They gotta ask. Like, the patient owns the problem, but then the doctor owns the solution. And sometimes the patient will walk in and be like, I need this medicine, and the doctor's like, maybe, like, tell me about your problem. They like pause from the feature request and they go one step back and they go, help me understand what's going on. Like, how long has this been happening? What else have you tried? That is a perfect, in my view, like customer interview, right? Because you're learning all the background information, you're learning about their life, and then you're understanding their problem. Then you go, actually, I think you need this, and then you kind of make your own leap to what the visionary product is. Like when Steve Jobs said that focus groups are worthless, I think that this is what he was getting at, where you don't ask people what you want, but you do understand them, and then you come to your own decision. At least with this category of products. And sometimes you're wrong. Like Steve Jobs has been wrong with some of his products and extremely right with others. But you can bet that all of them were grounded in a pretty deep understanding of what his customers were already doing, how they were communicating, how they were working, all of that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yes, sometimes you might get it wrong, but at least if it's coming from a place of understanding as opposed to that always makes me laugh as you say the doctor patient analogy, like the commercials for certain drugs where it's like, ask your doctor about this drug. I'm never going to do that. I'm going to tell them, I'm going to rely on them to tell me what I need. But I don't know, maybe some people do. And now,
you mentioned that a lot of the folks listening to this are from the consumer world, and it's funny how pervasive this is. Like in my house, we have conversations all the time where it's like, we need another closet, we need more closet space, and then you get into an argument about the closet, but actually if you roll that back, it's like, what's the issue here? It's like, the issue is there's nowhere easy to throw clothes before bed, like clothes that are between dirty and clean, right? It's like, I might wear it again tomorrow. And it's like, oh, well, there's a lot of ways to solve that, right? Like a shelf, a coat rack, it doesn't have to be a closet, but like even myself, like even in my own home, like we always jump to the solution, right? That's just how we think, because it's the concrete thing. And, you got to undo that habit.
For sure. I mean, I like to do DIY stuff in my house. I'm not very good at it, but any ideas I have, I sit on them for like 6 months, and I sort of criticize myself like, oh, I'm just indecisive. But actually it's like, I'm waiting to come up with a better solution, because my first idea is never the best one. Right. And so in this context of product innovation, if you're asking somebody on the spot in the moment, what would make this product better for you? Or, they might come up with their first idea, but 6 months later, or someone with this much knowledge of the product versus you internally with this much knowledge of the product are only thinking about a certain area. And so
Yeah. Like programmers all the time, like we'll get all excited about some idea, build a tool that we're desperate to use, and then we don't even use it ourselves. We'll spend like it is for us, like we that's how wrong we are about our own future needs, is that like, but whatever, it's fun. That's the fun of product development, I suppose. If it were easier, then the robots would be doing it already and none of us would have jobs.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of doing things quickly and like very iteratively, right? Is that it's okay to get things wrong sometimes, because the five next times you're going to get it right. And, just test and learn and trying different things, because sometimes you don't know until it's out in the market, and being able to learn that more quickly versus taking a year to develop something makes a big difference. And actually being able to test something in market versus might you use this?
It's also helpful. You want to pick the right tool for the learning job. There's no need to run these style of conversations, like one-on-one conversations, right? It's always going to be a time-consuming format for you or partners or whoever's doing them. And so I talked to someone building a product. It was like an app to teach music when after a new thing, and he was like, yeah, my first task is I'm surveying 1,000 customers to figure out which music instruments they want to learn how to play. And I was like, it's guitar. And he's like, yeah, but shouldn't I do the research? And I was like, no, it's like, Google it. It's guitar. And like you might choose to do a different one because it's easier. You might start with ukulele because it's got fewer strings and it's easier for kids if you want. But that's like that's a fact about the market. Like you should never do firsthand research for something you could have Googled, or some like fact about the world that someone else has already learned. Like you want to use these one-on-one conversations to get into inside the customer's heads, their decision-making, these hidden fears, little hidden embarrassments and hangups, the reasons they would say they're going to do something, but then they don't, all the stuff that can sink a product. And it's like, use it where it's appropriate. But if you can find an easier tool to get to the same learning goal, then like take the easy tool, right? You're not supposed to do this stuff just because. You're supposed to do it because it'll make your products better, or your marketing campaign, or your business strategy, or whatever else.
Sure. Yeah. And like you said, I mean, these are time-consuming conversations potentially, or it's maybe hard to get in front of these people. You want to maximize that time, not ask them questions you already know the answer to. And really, like you say, like dig in. I mean, with the mom test, it might, for some people, be very easy to get on the phone with your mom at any time you want to get that ask those questions. You can call them. But how does it look, in this environment where like, how do you reach the right people? How do you know who they are? How do you like book that time with them, get them to agree to talk to you?
So even for most new entrepreneurs, and certainly for most established businesses, like you probably know a few people in the industry, right? Like unless you're really screwing something up, like people who are willing to talk to you. And for this style of conversation, there's some types of conversations I'm very happy to pay participants to join for. Like, for example, user testing. I'm very comfortable paying people to join for user tests because I don't think that biases, and they don't need to be exactly my customer profile. But for these sorts of like understanding the customer's inner workings, what they're already doing and why, I want them to be as close to my actual customers as I can. So, if the product is for, like busy executives, and you're paying people $50 to talk to you, like you're not going to get the right people. You're going to get there's a selection bias at play there. And so there's a little bit of creativity required to actually, let me roll back a step. Every conversation, right? Like both sides are investing time in the conversation. And there's almost always like an implicit exchange of value that's going on. It's like we're both having fun, or it's like we're like, like the business networking lunch is like, we're both having fun. We're getting a break from work. We're chatting with each other. And like, maybe we'll find a way to swap customer lists or suppliers or who knows. The sales meeting, like the sales pitch, is like, maybe you find something that solves your problem and maybe I get some revenue. So there's like, again, there's the value for both sides. These pure like early stage customer learning conversations are a little bit weird because the customer doesn't really stand to benefit. And so you typically need to set them up, or at least I do. Maybe you have a better solution. But I try to engineer a way that it feels valuable for the customer, even though it actually isn't. There's a couple of different ways to do this. The easiest is just flattery. And people love to feel helpful, but they don't like to feel like interchangeable. So if someone goes like, hey, can you help me move this couch? You're like, no, anyone can help you move that couch. But if someone's like, hey, you in particular have this like deep career experience or deep life experience or deep industry experience, whatever it is, it's like, hey, you've raised 3 amazing children. It's like, I'm really trying to understand how at-home after-school education works. You've done such a great job with your kids. Like, would you be willing to take 15 minutes and just tell me about your parenting experiences and how you approached it and what you tried? And suddenly they're like, absolutely, I would love to. Whereas if you set that up and you said, hey, can I pick your brain for 15 minutes about a new product I'm working on? They go, no, thank you. It's like, right? Because you've shown that they in particular, you've kind of raised their experience, specifically them, up on this pedestal. And then you've kind of lowered yourself and you said, like, you have this amazing thing and you could be so helpful to me if you're willing to share it. And people love to share their stories. They love to share their experiences, whether it's personal or industry. But they need to also feel safe. So part of it is like, they want to know that they in particular can help make a difference. They want to know you're not a time waster, which can I pick your brain or can I ask you about this product feels like a time waster. It's too generic. And then they also want to know that it's not going to turn into a sneaky sales pitch. So you need to, what I like to do is I tell them the vision, but not the product. So I basically say like, hey, I'm working on some like education or some ways for parents to like think better about their kids' education, whatever. I mean, whatever your vision is. You don't know if that's a book, is it an app, is it a training course? It could be any product form factor, but at least they know the space. And then I caveat it, it's like super early, not trying to sell you anything, and then I switch into, elevating them on the pedestal with their experiences and kind of showing them how much they could help me. And that works really well. You still want warm intros if possible, but it brings the response rate up from like 5% to about 50% on warm intros. And that's what I do. If you're starting completely from scratch, then you need to find a way to bring people to you in most cases. So you can do it either by networking. So you brute force until you get the first person who likes you, and then you go warm intros from there. Or you can do it by bringing people to you, by planting a flag online. Customer communities, online manifestos, content marketing, those sorts of things all work well for this. For my current company, the way we set it up, it's called Useful Books. We basically build tools and community for independent nonfiction authors. And when we were like, this is our manifesto, we think this way about nonfiction. If you do too, come join us. And then when people joined, we sent them an email and said like, hey, we'd love to help you with your book. Like schedule time with us. Here's the link. And just tell us about your writing problems and your book problems and your everything problems. And so that was basically customer learning conversations coming to us at scale. And we didn't even have to schedule them or justify them, right? And after each conversation, it was them talking about their problems. And we'd give some advice. We'd try to help. We'd give some resources. But mostly it was just them talking about their problems. And they're like, thank you so much. That was amazing. And that was a case where it's the same conversation, but we'd change the context in a way where they perceived it as valuable for them. So suddenly we were doing them a favor rather than them doing us a favor. And honestly, we had to turn off the conversations at some point because we just had too many and we weren't getting any work done. But that's how we use like content plus community to do it.
I love that. That's a great problem to have. Too many customer conversations. Not a lot of people can say that. And it's interesting too about, great approaches across the board, but that key, like this is not a sales conversation and making sure people are aware of that. And I think this goes back to too, what you were saying about, if it's the entrepreneur, the founder kind of doing the interviews, they might get the compliments, right? Because they know that this is important to them. Like, it's probably not a salesperson that's best to be doing these. It may not be the founder unless, you're the only one, which certainly is the case quite a bit. But who do you recommend, like, actually conduct these interviews? Like somebody in between those two functions.
So you'd ideally, it's just got to be someone who is going to be able to influence the product roadmap and product choices in a meaningful way, not necessarily directly. So that could be like the product manager, or it could be the product marketing manager, or it could just be someone who is trusted by whoever's making those decisions, and they're like, like they have input. in a small company, it's good to get everyone doing at least a few of them. So you usually have, in my early stage businesses, like I might do the lion's share of them, but then I would try to bring other people so that they're at least getting some direct customer contact, at least occasionally, because otherwise they're just like, it's Rob with his customer insights again, like ignore him, but once they see it firsthand, they go, oh, wow, they really care about this. And in some cases on the team, so especially like, I don't know, like this is going to be very organization specific, right? It's going to depend on your team size. But the more the merrier. I mean, the trick, if I guess now I kind of am a product manager or product marketing manager or whatever within my team. And part of what I did early on is I was doing all the customer learning myself at the beginning. And I realized that was unsustainable and not ideal. So I looked for ways to change the process so that everyone would be exposed to it, but without putting undue time burdens on them. So one of the ways we did that is by sharing these little video clips, like the highlight reels. So they go, oh yeah, they start to see it. We used manual onboarding for much longer than was necessary. We're still doing it sometimes for our software products. And we have like a round robin booking system so that the onboardings get rotated through the whole team. So everyone does an onboarding occasionally. And so they get to see people, and that's basically a user test. We set up the onboardings as user tests. So we're like, hey, just go ahead and I'm here if you have any problems. And we kind of watch them fumble their way through the product and the onboarding. And there was a company in London that we were friends with called Songkick. They ended up having a big exit in the consumer kind of, live music space. And they had a really cool approach. It was a phone app primarily, where on Fridays, they realized their team, at this point, they probably had 50 people, 60 people on the team. And they noticed that their product decisions were kind of getting, people were like bike shedding, like arguing over minor features or going back and forth. They couldn't decide about stuff that really didn't matter. And they started ending work on Fridays after lunch, and they would hire really good musicians, and they would invite their local Songkick users who they knew through the app liked those musicians. And they'd say, hey, we've got this amazing band that like you can't get concert tickets for playing at our office. Come on in on this Friday. We've got drinks, we got food. And just everyone on their team would mingle. And they're just chatting with customers and they're like, oh, what did you think of the new version? And it was very unstructured, right? Like some of these conversations I overheard and I'm like, oh, that is not like well phrased. But at the same time, it was highly scalable. Everyone on the team was bouncing off of customers every week. And then they had a formal user testing room set up. And they would have the user research team basically going around, kind of pulling people aside and saying, hey, no pressure. If you want to just enjoy the music, that's great. But if you want, we've got a new version of the app. We would love to, it hasn't come out yet. We'd love to show it to you and get your, see what you think. It'll take about 35 minutes. Like, do you want to? And they would do that on the Friday afternoon. They would edit up the videos. And then at the Monday all hands, like everyone had talked to users on that Friday. And then at the Monday all hands, they would show like the highlight reel from that week's user testing. And so again, that was highly scalable, right? Very time efficient for the rest of the team. And so if you are the person who decides, or you have the ear of the person who decides, then fine, you can kind of brute force it. If you want to spread it out so that everyone in the team or the organization or more people are learning, then brute forcing it no longer works because the time costs start to feel too high and people resist it. So then you go like, okay, what can I do to bring down the time costs while maintaining the learning? Can I get the customers to come to us? Can I make it this recurring auto-scheduled thing where no one needs to think about it? Can we add this culture of like after every customer contact, you share something in the team Slack channel, like a little video clip, like what is it? But, you find something and it keeps everyone on the organization, aware that there's people at the other end of the product.
Totally. I think sometimes people forget that when they're looking at pie charts all day long. But I love the creativity there and the sort of scrappiness of, let's kind of do double, like you're sort of surprising and delighting your customers. And like you said, like giving them something in return. They've got no idea they're being researched in that context, which is just brilliant. And what it does, like you said, it puts it like infiltrates customer understanding throughout the entire business. It's not just sitting with product or with insights or with marketing. It's everyone. And some of the companies that I've seen really scale and grow really well, they have like KPIs against how many customer conversations have you had this week for everyone, regardless of your role. And I think that's really important to keep people remembering, who are we doing this for? Who's using it? Like, are we solving their problems? Which is really cool.
Yeah, it changes the culture, and it's exciting. It's exciting. Like, people join the company in most cases because they care about the impact of the products, and the more you can show them, like, the people, right? It's like, it makes that real. It's like, oh yeah, we really are helping. It's I like it. I don't think, because startups are a grind. Like, I don't necessarily enjoy the work, but it's like the same with books. It's like, there's so much of the writing process I just hate. But I do a lot of reader conversations in the same way. Like, before I start writing a book or while I'm writing it, I'm like, I'm beta reading, which is the equivalent of user testing. I'm doing like coaching conversations, which is the equivalent of like a concierge MVP. I'm like doing all these things for the book. And I'm like, man, I really need to get this thing finished because people are waiting for it and they need it and it's going to help them. And it's like, and that's the only way I can drag myself through the misery of the editing process.
Yeah, I could see that. I've not written a book, but it sounds sort of awful. So great job. This is one that has had a big impact on us, certainly, and our, everybody I know that's read it. We use like some of the question wording and the approach for our sales conversations, for when we structure our customer advisory board meetings, like all of our product marketing conversations, like everything is, we've sort of flipped this. What have you done, as opposed to what would you do, is kind of the general change that's happened, which is just awesome. It makes a really big difference in what you learn and what you can do with that information. So
that's awesome. I'm super happy to hear it. And one thing I want to like caveat or clarify is that these types of conversations aren't going to be equally useful for every category of product. So they're at their best when you're doing something that has, it's like customer risk, it's market risk. You're not sure if people really want it. You're not sure if people are really going to use it. If it's pure technology risk, like the Eric Ries's example is like, if you're making the cure for cancer, there's not a lot of market risk there. It's much more like product risk. It's like, can we build the thing to do what it says it's going to do? So you wouldn't need to do these conversations if it's 100% product risk. 100% product risk is pretty rare, but they're easiest also if you're like following a traditional sales process. You can do it when you're a marketing-led company. You just need to be a little bit more creative because you're not naturally going to be having these one-on-one conversations with your customers. So that's when you need to do the stuff like Songkick or like the customer community, where you get a little bit more creative about how you set it up. And there's also some products that are so far in the future that they're just very hard to learn about at all. So a recent example of this is 3D printing. 3D printing technology is getting so good. I saw some of the new stuff at Hewlett Packard, and it's unbelievable. They can print like moving metal engines, just like donk. It's so cool what they can make. And they're working really hard, and they're doing we were talking about exactly the same stuff, because they're like, none of this like opens up so many new use cases, so many new markets. It's like impossible to do any traditional customer research about it. Because people don't know, like they don't have the existing behaviors to map onto. And even with, maybe you've got some advice for them, but like I looked at it and I'm like, I think it's just going to be hard, right? You're like so deep in the future. It's so murky. It's so far away. It's like in some of those cases, you kind of need to lead with the prototype, lead with the tinkering, like watch what the enthusiasts are doing, much more this grassroots hobbyist approach. And eventually you're like, oh, that's the use case. But it's very hard to get in advance, right? In those deep future use cases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wouldn't even know where to begin with that. But I think you're right. That's a great example where there's, kind of places set up where people can go and use the technology that can't purchase it themselves, right? These I don't know what they're called, but hobby things. And my brother has one. He's like a total engineering nerd, and he has one, but he basically like builds me little mini figurines of stuff when I want it. So, but I think seeing what people are doing with it and, using it, how they're using it is exactly how you figure out what they could be doing with it the next time, and figuring out the problems that they're solving or not solving.
It's at some points within every product lifecycle, there's bits where you just have to go into a slog where it's just low data and you just got to do the work for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, right? An example of this would be like if your product really relied on newsletter marketing, You're like, well, we need the newsletter audience. And it's just like, that's going to be a slog to build that, right?
Yeah.
And it's a case where you can't be too tentative when you're going into a slog, because half a slog is worthless, right? You've invested half the effort and you've got none of the reward. And so, you get the information you can up front, and then at least you're going into the slog as intentionally and aware as you're able, which means that you don't second guess it like once you're halfway in.
Yeah, totally.
One more. The Segway is another useful example because Segway raised a lot of money, right, from a lot of smart investors, and it was a product everyone was excited about. Segway was originally pitched as the solution to city traffic, and they claimed that their industry, their target market was automobiles. They're like, no one's going to drive in cities because they're going to use Segways. And they did a lot of customer research. They just kind of did it wrong. They asked questions like tell us about your experiences in traffic and stuff that sounds very much like we've been talking about. And they got these stats, and they're like 80% of drivers are miserable in their car, or they get road rage once a week. They hate it. They say the commute is the worst part of their day. It's like politicians think that like city pollution is this huge problem. Like people say this problem's worth this much money. They got so much data, but ultimately what they didn't do is get people to stand on a prototype, because people are like, oh, I'm not riding this thing to work. I feel very silly. And that was a case where like all the customer learning in the world kind of didn't matter, because ultimately there was also an important risk in the feel of the product. This is true for a lot of phone apps. Like Uber would have been very hard to learn about without a prototype. And so in those cases, you often have to combine these techniques where you're like leading with these prototypes, simple, lovable, complete, version 1, however you want to think about it. And then you combine that with the deep customer learning. And then you're getting your prototype, your qual, your quant, all that stuff together. But, those are harder and more expensive, right? Because you have to build a thing before you figure out if it's going to work.
Right, totally. So funny. This is the second time in the last week that Segway has come up on this show. We just talked about them last week, and, kind of some of the mistakes they made and the gaps in their research, and, that they didn't really consider the fact that they kind of have to change the infrastructure of the roads and how cities work, right, in order for it to be safe to drive them. So there were so many components that were working in their favor and others that weren't. But it's interesting to see how they're like Segway technology is not forever lost and gone. It's just being used a bit differently now, which is kind of interesting to see.
And much smaller market than they expected.
Oh, totally. So we got actually, like, as I mentioned, our team like really loved the book. So we got a lot of questions from our team that they wanted me to ask. I think one of them, actually the one that I want to ask you is, did your mom read the book? And did you ask for her opinion before you published it?
Yeah, she read it. She was funny. Afterwards, she said, did we have these conversations? I don't remember talking about cookbooks with you. And I was like, oh, no, I just made it up. And she goes, oh, well. And then she basically said all this stuff she's like, oh, well, I think it's a really good book. Yep. It's like, oh, yeah, yep. That's you're pretty self-referential. That's what it's about.
Totally. You should totally print this book and everybody's going to love it.
Yeah, she's always supported. Like with my books now, she's just sort of like, because I've written 3 now, and she's like, oh, I'm sure it's good. I don't think it's for me,
That's actually quite honest. I appreciate that. Well, I mean, this has been great. I've been like furiously taking notes in the backstage as you were talking, and so really appreciate you sharing your approach and kind of the way you think about doing this stuff and the way you're doing it now. And, I would highly recommend everybody out there. This is a great book. If you haven't read it, please pick it up. We'll put some links in the show notes so you can reach it. But yeah, thank you so much. This is a great conversation.
I had a blast, Jen. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for listening in and joining us today. We will talk with Colin Shaw, a global influencer in customer experience and marketing, on another episode next week. See you then.